know how it is. We're all trying to wrap our heads around these massive shifts happening, these really big debates.
Yeah, and you want to understand them quickly, get the core ideas without, reading a textbook.
Exactly. Get to the heart of it. So today we're tackling a big one, universal basic income, UBI.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be popping up everywhere now. Silicon Valley, political debates, just general conversation.
It really is. And the central question, I think, is pretty stark. Is UBI like a vital safety net for what's coming? Or is it actually a dangerous step maybe towards unforeseen problems?
That's the core tension, absolutely. And we've been looking at a report that maps out this whole debate, laying out the main arguments, pro and con.
Okay, so it digs into the economics, equality issues, the future of work,
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
precisely. It draws on discussions about all of that. So our mission here really is to break down those key points for you.
Right, so by the end of this deep dive, you should have a much better handle on what the main disagreements are when it comes to UBI.
Yeah, a clearer picture of the whole landscape.
Okay, sounds good. Let's jump in. Why are people actually advocating for this? What's the case for UBI?
Well, a lot of proponents see it as a necessary response to some really big economic changes. Think automation, for one.
AI taking jobs, yeah.
Right. And also outsourcing the growth of the gig economy, less stable traditional employment.
That makes a lot of sense. It feels like the ground is shifting under our feet, economically speaking. I remember that McKinsey report from last year
Oh, yeah, that got a lot of attention.
said something like 45 million American jobs could be at high risk from AI in the next decade.
That's the figure, up to 45 million. It's a jaw-dropping number, really.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
So against that background, a regular income floor, it starts to sound more plausible to some people.
Exactly. It's seen as a potential cushion. You remember Andrew Yang's campaign back in 2020?
It's a freedom dividend, yeah.
Right, his $1,000 a month for every adult proposal. That really pushed UBI into the mainstream conversation, connecting it directly to these automation fears.
And how did he suggest paying for something like that? Because that's always the first question, isn't it?
Well, his plan involved a couple of key things. Consolidating some existing welfare programs, so streamlining things there.
Okay.
And also, crucially, taxing the big tech companies, the ones often driving the automation.
Right, the ones benefiting from it, arguably.
That was the argument. And, this isn't just theory. There have been real-world experiments. The Stockton, California pilot program is probably the most cited one recently.
Ah, yes, Stockton. What did they find there? Because the results were kind of surprising, weren't they?
They were pretty interesting, yeah. The recipients, they actually saw an increase in full-time employment compared to the control group.
So that's counterintuitive to some of the criticism, right? The idea that people would just stop working.
Exactly. They also reported improved mental health, less anxiety, less depression, and unsurprisingly, perhaps, reduced income volatility and financial stress.
So better well-being overall, and potentially more work, not less. How do advocates explain that boost in employment?
Well, the thinking is, if you have that basic floor, that security, maybe you can afford childcare to take a job, or fix your car to get to an interview. Or maybe you have the breathing room to find a better job, not just the first one that comes along.
Or maybe even start a small business. Take a risk.
Potentially, yes. It reduces that immediate desperation. And that ties into the broader argument about freedom.
Freedom. How so?
The freedom to say no to a terrible job, an exploitative situation, the freedom to invest time in education, or maybe care for a relative, or do community work, things that aren't paid but have value.
That's a powerful argument. It reframes it from just income replacement to enabling agency.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even a brand new idea, fundamentally. People point out that Martin Luther King Jr. himself argued for a guaranteed income way back when.
Really? I didn't know that connection.
Yeah, he saw it as a direct, effective way to abolish poverty.
Wow. Okay, so historical roots, pilot program results, the freedom argument, anything else on the pro side?
Yeah.
The report mentioned something about fringe optimism.
Ah, right. That's looking further out. Some proponents, maybe more on the edges, see UBI as almost inevitable.
Inevitable. Because of AI.
Because of AI and automation potentially handling so much of the work currently done by humans. And that kind of, post-work future scenario some people envision.
Okay.
UBI isn't just a safety net. It's a fundamental part of how society functions. Maybe moving towards a different kind of economy altogether, like a resource-based one. Some even talk about it triggering a a global economic reset.
A whole new system.
Yeah.
It's a very big picture view.
It's definitely optimistic, future-focused thinking.
Okay, so that paints a pretty compelling picture for why someone might support UBI. But, like you said, there's always another side. Let's switch gears. What are the main arguments against it?
Well, the biggest, most immediate hurdle for many is just the sheer cost, the financial feasibility.
Right. We mentioned Yang's funding ideas, but the overall price tag must be huge.
It potentially is. The report cites a Heritage Foundation estimate from this year. Now, this is one perspective, of course, but they calculated a basic UBI in the U.S. could cost around $3 trillion annually.
$3 trillion per year?
Per year, and that specific estimate assumed it would be on top of existing programs, not replacing all of them.
Wow, okay, that is a staggering number. Where would that money even come from? Massive tax hikes, huge deficits.
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? The scale raises major concerns about inflation, about the sustainability of it all. And this ties directly into the second big concern, the impact on work incentives.
Ah, okay. The argument that if you give people money for nothing, they'll do nothing, or less anyway.
That's the classic concern, that it could significantly disincentivize work, leading to labor shortages, reduced productivity, and ultimately a weaker economy overall.
But what about the Stockton results, showing increased employment?
That's the counter-evidence proponents point to. Critics might argue, though, that a limited pilot program isn't the same as a nationwide permanent UBI. Maybe the effects change at scale or over a longer time period.
Okay, fair point. The scale question is definitely real.
And there's also an argument that goes beyond just the economics of work. It's about the non-financial aspects.
Like what?
Like the idea that jobs, even imperfect ones, provide more than just income. They can provide structure, purpose, social connection, a sense of contribution, skill development.
Community? Yeah, I can see that. Losing that structure could be a negative thing for some people, even if they have basic income.
That's the worry, that UBI might inadvertently lead to social isolation or a loss of meaning for some segments of the population. Then there are concerns about government power.
How does UBI play into that? Increased dependency.
Potentially. The concern is about government overreach and maybe surveillance. The idea that a system starting as universal and unconditional, evolve.
Evolve how? You mean become conditional?
Possibly. Could it eventually be tied to certain behaviors? You get your UBI if you do X, Y, and Z, maybe linked to health choices or digital tracking or participation in certain programs.
That sounds a bit dystopian. The potential for control.
It's a concern raised by critics, the potential slippery slope from support to control. It brings up fundamental questions about individual liberty.
It reminds me of that Thomas Sowell quote the report mentioned, something about trade-offs.
Yeah. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. And UBI is a massive bet with other people's money. It really highlights that risk perspective.
A massive bet. Okay, and similar to the fringe optimism, the report also mentioned a fringe concern. What's that about?
So this mirrors the optimism, but on the negative side. It's a more speculative worry, but it taps into growing anxieties some people have about technology and control.
Okay.
The idea here is that UBI, especially if delivered digitally, could become a tool for elite control, making people dependent on a state-issued digital income.
Which could then be managed.
Potentially managed or programmed, conditioning people perhaps to accept things like central bank digital currencies, CBDCs.
Ah, the programmable money idea.
Right. The concern, again on the fringe, is that these CBDCs could be linked to social credit scores or behavioral requirements. So UBI becomes less about freedom and more about compliance.
Wow. So a pathway to control rather than liberation. That's a stark contrast to the optimistic view.
A very stark contrast. And it really lays bare the fundamental tension here.
Yeah. It feels like we're looking at two completely different potential futures stemming from the same policy. On one hand, UBI is this crucial support, this foundation for security in a really uncertain economy.
A way to adapt and ensure basic dignity.
But on the other hand, the fear is that it could be this mechanism for control, maybe eroding ambition, responsibility, even freedom itself.
That's the core dilemma highlighted in the debate, exactly. Is it a necessary adaptation, or is it a dangerous path threatening core values like ambition and economic dynamism?
It's definitely not a simple issue with easy answers. It seems clear, though, whichever side of the debate you lean towards, that the whole landscape of work, income, and security,
Yeah.
it's changing.
Yeah,
fundamentally.
undeniably.
Hmm.
The status quo is being challenged by technology and economic shifts. The conversation about how we ensure security in the future is happening, whether UBI is the answer or not.
Which really leaves us all with something to think about.
Absolutely. And maybe the question for you, listening to all this, is given these arguments, these potential futures, what parts of this whole puzzle, the future of work, our social safety nets, the role of technology, what parts do you think we most need to be digging into and debating right now?